A critical reflection on the U.S. Ambassador's farewell letter to Ghana. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where the real Africa speaks. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. Today, we uncover the powerful truth behind a diplomat's heartfelt goodbye to Ghana, a nation that continues to defy the odds in West Africa. This is more than a love letter, it's a wake-up call for Africa. Stay with us as we explore why Ghana's democratic model matters now more than ever, and what it teaches the rest of the continent. A farewell letter that speaks volumes. In a deeply personal and reflective letter titled Ghana, A Love Letter to Ghana, the outgoing U.S. Ambassador to Ghana, 2022-2025, offered a rich testament to the country's democratic resilience, institutional maturity, and entrepreneurial vigor. While this farewell message is affectionate and celebratory, it carries profound diplomatic, economic, and geopolitical significance, especially at a time when democratic backsliding, military coups, and civil unrest are increasingly defining West Africa. This episode offers a critical analysis of the ambassador's letter by examining Ghana's democratic evolution, its socio-economic trajectory, the strategic U.S.-Ghana partnership, and how this compares to the broader African context. It also outlines forward-looking insights for continental leaders, development partners, and African citizens invested in shaping a more secure, democratic, and prosperous Africa. 1. Democracy in Ghana, a beacon in a region at risk. The ambassador's recognition of Ghana's democracy is not mere flattery. It reflects decades of Ghana's commitment to electoral integrity, political tolerance, and peaceful power transitions. Since returning to multi-party democracy in 1992, Ghana has conducted 8 peaceful transfers of power, setting a regional standard that contrasts sharply with countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Niger, all of which have experienced military coups since 2020. As Freedom House's 2024 report indicates, Ghana remains one of the few free countries in West Africa. Freedom House 2024. The 2024 general elections, referenced by the ambassador, were widely lauded by observers such as the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, CODIO, and international missions for their transparency and professionalism, in stark contrast to the flawed and violent elections in Sierra Leone, 2023, and Nigeria, 2023, EU-EOM reports. Carter Center. Ghanaians have not shied away from tackling challenges head-on to shore up their democracy for generations to come. U.S. Ambassador 2. Institutional strength. Ghana's counterbalance to democratic fragility. One striking feature of Ghana's democratic model is the robustness of its institutions. The Independent Electoral Commission, EC, civil society organizations, and traditional leadership structures, like that of the national chief imam, who the ambassador highlighted as a symbol of interfaith tolerance. Where countries like Cameroon and Uganda have seen their electoral commissions captured by incumbents, Ghana's EC has largely retained its credibility, operating under constitutional checks and judicial oversight. Ghana's Supreme Court rulings on electoral disputes have also bolstered public trust, a luxury many African citizens in countries with politicized judiciaries do not enjoy. Comparative snapshot, electoral governance in West Africa, country electoral commission, independence, military interference, last coup, electoral integrity, 2024, Ghana high, none never strong, Nigeria medium. No, 1983, disputed Mali low. Yes, 2021, none, transition, Sierra Leone low. No, never disputed, 2023, Burkina Faso. Low yes, 2022, none, transition. Sources: Freedom House, ECOWAS, EU-EOM reports, Afrobarometer, 2024. 3. U.S.-Ghana. Relations, a shift toward equitable partnership. The ambassador's letter emphasizes a diplomatic pivot from traditional aid to trade-based partnerships. Echoing former President John Mahama's 2016 assertion, Africa needs a fair chance to trade, the letter marks a recognition of Ghana not as a dependent recipient, but as an equal partner. the United States' $25 million annual security cooperation, major commercial investments like Valco, and over 100 U.S. companies operating in Ghana reflect this maturing relationship. The emphasis on private sector-led economic restoration aligns with Ghana's 2023-2026 IMF program, which prioritizes fiscal consolidation, anti-corruption, and public sector reforms, IMF Country Report number 23-246. Furthermore, U.S. investments in malaria control, agriculture, and youth education showcase a multidimensional partnership that addresses health, food security, and human capital development, key building blocks for sustainable development. Too many governments argue that democracy and free trade must wait for security. In fact, democracy and free trade strengthen security. U.S. Ambassador 4. Entrepreneurial Spirit and Gender Inclusion, Ghana's Development Edge. The ambassador's homage to the Ghanaian hustle and women-led economic activity at Makola Market brings to light an often underappreciated aspect of African development: informal entrepreneurship as an engine of growth. According to the World Bank's 2023 Ghana Country Economic Memorandum, nearly 80% of Ghana's workforce is informal, with women dominating market-based trading and services. The mention of the Deacon Center, a creative entrepreneurship incubator, reflects the emerging innovation ecosystem supported by digital expansion and youth-led startups. Compared to many African countries where youth unemployment remains a ticking time bomb, notably in South Africa, Tunisia, and Nigeria, Ghana's focus on youth investment and education positions it for longer-term resilience. 5. Inclusive growth and regional security, Ghana's soft power diplomacy. Perhaps the most strategic section of the letter is the link between inclusive economic growth and national security. Unlike the Sahel states, where marginalization of northern populations has bred violent extremism, Ghana's deliberate investments in its northern region, e.g., infrastructure, education, agriculture, have served as a buffer against the rise of jihadist insurgencies across its borders. Additionally, Ghana's role in UN peacekeeping, its tenure on the UN Security Council 2022-2023, and hosting of the first-ever UN peacekeeping ministerial in Africa, elevate Ghana's status as a continental security influencer. Ghana exports peace and remains resilient to the violent extremism which has plagued its neighbors. U.S. Ambassador 6. Challenges and Risks Ahead. A Balanced Reality Check. While the letter reads as a celebration, it is important to critically assess Ghana's current challenges. Debt distress. Ghana defaulted on its Eurobond debt in 2022 and entered an IMF program in 2023. Debt restructuring negotiations with private creditors are ongoing, with implications for fiscal space. Corruption concerns. Despite policy commitments, Ghana's score in Transparency International's 2023 CPI fell to 43/100, down from 45 in 2020. Youth unemployment. Though lower than some regional peers, it remains a concern with over 30% of university graduates unemployed within 2 years of graduation. Ghana Statistical Service 2023. Digital disinformation. As noted by the ambassador, strategic adversaries, particularly from outside Africa, are actively engaged in eroding trust in democratic processes, leveraging social media and false narratives. These risks demand continued vigilance, institutional reforms, and global support rooted in mutual respect and cooperation, not dependency. Democracy by example. How Ghana's political culture offers a roadmap for African renewal. Ghana's sustained commitment to democratic norms is not merely the outcome of strong institutions or international partnerships. It is also the product of a deeply rooted political culture of civic participation, tolerance, and compromise. This culture, nurtured over decades through media freedom, active civil society, and engaged traditional leadership, presents an important case study for African states searching for a viable model to consolidate or rebuild democratic governance. Whereas many African countries have experienced elite-driven, top-down reform processes that quickly lose legitimacy, Ghana's political development has been uniquely participatory, with real citizen engagement at local and national levels. Community-based organizations, youth networks, and interfaith dialogue platforms form the backbone of the country's democratic immune system. Political tolerance and electoral legitimacy. Lessons from Ghana's 2024 elections. In Ghana's 2024 general elections, the peaceful conduct of voters in historically polarized regions like the Northern region and the Volta region once again demonstrated a national ethos of tolerance. Notably, the Ghana Electoral Commission rolled out a biometric verification system upgrade, supported by the United States and European Union, which significantly reduced incidents of ballot tampering and identity fraud. In contrast, the 2023 elections in Sierra Leone, marred by accusations of data manipulation and restricted observer access, EU EOM Final Report 2023, exposed the institutional weaknesses that can trigger post-election violence and democratic decline. Meanwhile, Senegal, after a brief constitutional crisis over President Macky Sall's third-term ambitions, reversed course due to domestic pressure and international outcry, a sign that political will and civic vigilance can still prevail. Key differentiator: Ghana's ability to build a culture of electoral defeat acceptance stands in stark contrast to countries where losing parties resort to violence, boycott governance, or accuse opponents of foreign collaboration. This normalization of peaceful political alternation is critical to democratic maturity. Africa-wide comparison, Ghana's edge, and the need for cross-learning. The African continent currently presents a divided democratic landscape where countries like Botswana, Namibia, Mauritius, Cape Verde, and Ghana are celebrated for political stability, while others descend into cycles of military coups, authoritarian consolidation, or state fragility. Country last democratic transition, current system, coup risk political stability, 0-100. Ghana, 2024, multi-party democracy low, 80. Nigeria, 2023, multi-party democracy medium, 60. Kenya, 2022, multi-party democracy medium, 65. Ethiopia, NA, dominant party rule, authoritarian hybrid medium, 40. Mali, NA, coup 2021, military transition high, 30. Uganda, NA, no transition since 1986, de facto autocracy low, 35. Senegal 2024, democratic correction low, 75. Data adapted from Mo Ibrahim Index and Economist Intelligence Unit 2024 projections. From the data, it becomes evident that Ghana's democratic sustainability is built on more than periodic elections. It is reinforced by checks and balances, inter-ethnic cohesion, and media pluralism, which remain lacking in many peer nations. Cultural and religious tolerance, the silent guardians of peace. The ambassador's tribute to the national chief imam, a 105-year-old spiritual leader who has for decades exemplified tolerance and unity, brings to light the soft power strength of Ghana's religious harmony. At a time when countries like Nigeria face deadly Christian-Muslim clashes and the Sahel sees the spread of jihadist violence, Ghana's religious institutions serve as stabilizing agents. For example, the annual Ramadan-Easter Interfaith Peace Prayer, co-hosted by Christian and Muslim leaders in Accra and Kumasi, is a deliberate effort to foster mutual understanding, particularly among youth in urban slums and Zongos, Muslim-majority communities. Such efforts are often overlooked in traditional security frameworks, but have proven vital in creating resilient communities that reject extremism and political manipulation. U.S. Soft Power and African Agency, a balanced partnership model. The ambassador's farewell message also illustrates an evolving U.S. diplomatic model in Africa, one that emphasizes respect, equality, and mutual benefit rather than patronage. This shift is evident in U.S. support for entrepreneurial development through the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, and USAID's West Africa Trade Hub, educational exchange, with a record 6,800 Ghanaian students studying in the U.S. as of 2024, the highest from West Africa. Cultural diplomacy, including support for Ghana's Year of Return and Beyond the Return tourism campaigns, which have injected over $2 billion into the local economy, Ghana Tourism Authority 2023. However, A critical lens must also be applied to ensure that this partnership continues to avoid neo-colonial patterns, respects African-led policy priorities, and counters the narrative pushed by China, Russia, and other strategic adversaries that democracy is a Western imposition. Toward a continental democratic compact, what the African Union can learn from Ghana. If Ghana's success holds continental lessons, the African Union, AU, must translate these into action. AU Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, adopted in 2007, remains largely symbolic unless backed by credible enforcement mechanisms and peer accountability. Ghana's example shows that investment in civic education is non-negotiable. Professionalization of electoral commissions must be continent-wide. Constitutional term limits must be defended, not removed. Traditional and faith-based leaders must be co-opted into national peace strategies. ECOWAS, in particular, must rethink its sanctions-heavy approach to coups and work on long-term democracy-building frameworks in Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, possibly through Ghana-led peer mentorship models. From default to resilience, Ghana's economic reforms and the road to inclusive prosperity. Ghana's recent economic trajectory has been marked by both hardship and hope. After defaulting on its sovereign debt in 2022, largely due to a combination of external shocks, COVID-19, Russia-Ukraine war, global inflation, and domestic mismanagement, the country entered a $3 billion IMF program aimed at restoring macroeconomic stability, reviving investor confidence, and laying the groundwork for inclusive growth. But Ghana's path from default to resilience offers broader lessons for Africa's debt-distressed economies, such as Zambia, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tunisia. Ghana's fiscal consolidation blueprint. What the IMF program entails. Under the current IMF program, Ghana has committed to a three-pronged strategy. 1. Debt restructuring. External. Ghana has been negotiating with its Eurobond holders and official creditors under the G20's Common Framework for Debt Treatment. While progress has been made with bilateral creditors, notably China and the Paris Club, negotiations with private bondholders remain delicate. Domestic. Ghana successfully restructured over GHC 83 billion in local debt through the Domestic Debt Exchange Program, DDEP, in early 2023, reducing interest costs and maturities. 2. Revenue mobilization. The introduction of measures such as the electronic transfer levy, e-levy, and property tax digitization seek to improve Ghana's historically low tax-to-GDP ratio, 13% versus Africa's average of 18%, AFDB 2024. The Ghana Revenue Authority's digitization drive has helped plug leakages and expand the tax net, especially within the informal sector. 3. Expenditure rationalization. The government has committed to freezing new public sector hiring, except for health and education, cutting non-essential spending, and improving public financial management. Targeted social safety nets such as LEAP, Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty, and school feeding programs have been protected to shield the most vulnerable from austerity impacts. Despite these efforts, inflation remains high, hovering at 25 to 30% in 2024, and the Ghanaian cedi remains under pressure. However, signs of stabilization, including improved FX reserves, declining inflation since early 2025, and a narrowing fiscal deficit, have restored cautious optimism among investors and multilateral lenders. Africa-wide debt stress, Ghana as a test case. Ghana is not alone in its debt woes. According to the IMF and World Bank 2024, 22 African countries are at high risk of debt distress, with several already in default. The continent's external public debt hit $1.2 trillion in 2023, with rising servicing costs and dwindling revenues. Country IMF program, as of 2024, debt status key lessons from Ghana, Zambia. Yes, 1.3 BN. Default, 2020. Swift restructuring with creditor coordination. Kenya under negotiation. At high-risk revenue mobilization. Public sector reforms. Ethiopia. Yes, limited progress. Debt restructuring stalled need for transparency and geopolitical neutrality. Tunisia, yes, facing political gridlock. Importance of political consensus. Ghana, yes, 3BN. Default, 2022. Debt exchange, tax reforms, IMF engagement. Ghana's experience underscores the urgency of African-led debt accountability frameworks, better fiscal discipline, and strategic economic diversification, but it also warns against over-reliance on external borrowing without corresponding investment in domestic productivity and export expansion. Youth, innovation, and the future of Ghana's economy. The most promising aspect of Ghana's post-crisis recovery lies in its demographic dividend. With over 57% of its population under 25, Ghana, like much of sub-Saharan Africa, is poised to benefit from a youthful, increasingly connected, and digitally savvy labor force. Initiatives like Ghana Tech Lab and National Entrepreneurship and Innovation Program, NEIP, the You Start Ghana policy to fund youth startups, expansion of TVET, technical and vocational education and training pathways, are beginning to reshape the landscape of employment and enterprise. Still, unemployment and underemployment remain acute, with urban youth particularly vulnerable to economic exclusion and political disillusionment. To turn this demographic potential into inclusive prosperity, Ghana must ensure access to affordable finance for youth-led businesses, invest heavily in STEM education, green skills, and digital infrastructure, expand public-private partnerships to match skills with market demand, strengthen access to regional and global markets for Ghanaian products and services. Agricultural transformation, feeding Ghana and the continent. As noted in the ambassador's letter, U.S. support in Ghana's agriculture sector, particularly in cashew, soy, shea, and mango cultivation, has catalyzed agribusiness growth, enhanced food security, and increased rural incomes. But agriculture in Ghana is still largely rain-fed and low in mechanization, despite contributing over 20% to GDP and employing 38% of the labor force. Forward-looking strategies include scaling solar-powered irrigation, as piloted in northern Ghana, expanding agri-tech platforms that link farmers to markets, inputs, and weather data, strengthening agricultural extension services and post-harvest value chains, leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, to increase agri-exports and reduce dependence on volatile global markets. Ghana's experience could serve as a blueprint for regional agricultural resilience, especially in the face of climate change and global supply shocks. The power of the diaspora and cultural diplomacy. Another underutilized asset in Ghana's long-term development strategy is the diaspora. With millions of Ghanaians abroad, many in the US, UK, and across Africa, remittances now exceed $4 billion annually, surpassing FDI and ODA. But beyond remittances, the diaspora represents a transnational force for innovation, investment, and global influence. The year of return, 2019, and beyond the return, 2020-2030, initiatives repositioned Ghana as a cultural hub and homeland for the global Black diaspora, attracting celebrities, scholars, and entrepreneurs. To deepen this connection, Ghana can introduce diaspora bonds to finance infrastructure and housing, offer dual citizenship incentives and streamlined investment processes, partner with diaspora-led NGOs to support rural education, healthcare, and tech incubation, promote Afro-descendant diplomacy through art, film, festivals, and academic exchange. This model of cultural and economic diplomacy, rooted in Pan-African identity and mutual gain, has enormous potential for replication across Africa. The new front lines, defending African democracy against threats from within and without. As Ghana positions itself as a regional democratic anchor, the threats confronting its democracy and those of its neighbors are evolving. The battleground has shifted beyond polling stations and parliaments to cyberspace, information ecosystems, and subversive geopolitical maneuvers. Defending democratic gains now demands not only institutional reform, but also vigilance against disinformation, foreign influence operations, and internal authoritarian tendencies. Cybersecurity and information integrity, the rise of digital warfare. Ghana's expanding digital infrastructure, fueled by mobile penetration, fintech innovations, and e-governance, has opened doors for economic transformation. However, this connectivity also exposes the country to cyber threats and digital disinformation campaigns, often engineered to sow distrust in democratic institutions. During the 2024 elections, Ghana's National Communications Authority, NCA, collaborated with Facebook and Twitter, now X, to monitor and respond to viral misinformation, particularly around voter registration, ballot results, and fabricated speeches attributed to candidates. Despite these efforts, several deepfake videos and AI-generated false claims circulated widely in the days leading up to the polls. These events are not isolated. In Nigeria's 2023 elections, coordinated bot campaigns on WhatsApp were used to incite ethnic tensions, while in Kenya's 2022 elections, researchers found that political deepfakes had millions of views within hours of publication. This signals a new form of hybrid warfare, weaponized information, which aims to undermine democratic resilience without firing a bullet. Key measures Ghana and Africa must advance: digital literacy campaigns targeting rural and urban youth, cybersecurity infrastructure investment, including local AI monitoring tools, regional frameworks through ECOWAS and the AU to coordinate cyber defense and electoral integrity protocols, legislation that criminalizes foreign-funded election disinformation without stifling free speech, civil-military relations and democratic safeguards. The ambassador's praise for Ghana's professional military under civilian control is well earned. Ghana has not experienced a military coup since 1981, a rarity in a region increasingly plagued by military takeovers. The Ghana Armed Forces, GAF, remains apolitical, focused on peacekeeping, national defense, and humanitarian missions. However, the situation elsewhere in West Africa is deteriorating rapidly. Between 2020 and 2024, 9 coups or attempted coups occurred in Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Gabon, often accompanied by populist rhetoric claiming to restore order in the face of civilian government failures. These juntas frequently enjoy short-term public support due to disenchantment with democratic elites, but they tend to restrict freedoms, suppress opposition, and delay elections indefinitely. Ghana's role in democratic defense diplomacy, leading ECO, was calls for a recalibration of regional response mechanisms, prioritizing dialogue, transition timelines, and credible monitoring, hosting civil-military dialogues and military academies to train future officers in democratic norms, using its moral authority and successful example to mentor transitional regimes on governance best practices, supporting AU and ECOWAS protocols that deny legitimacy or aid to unconstitutional governments. In addition, Ghana's peacekeeping record, over 3,000 active personnel deployed globally, demonstrates the country's commitment to international order and collective security. Geopolitical pressures, the new scramble for African influence. As the ambassador noted, strategic adversaries are actively seeking to undermine public trust in democratic governance across Africa. This is not merely ideological competition, it is a geopolitical scramble for resources, loyalty, and strategic positioning. Russia has deepened ties with military regimes in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Central African Republic, often via the Wagner Group, offering security support in exchange for mining contracts and diplomatic alignment. China continues its expansive infrastructure financing model, raising concerns about debt dependency, labor practices, and lack of transparency, even as it provides much-needed roads, ports, and digital networks. Turkey, Iran, and Gulf states are expanding influence through religious, educational, and economic channels, creating a complex web of soft power competition. Ghana's continued alignment with democratic values, market openness, and Western partnerships, balanced with non alignment and respect for African agency, positions it as a neutral arbiter in a multipolar world. However, this role requires agility, strategic communication, and a foreign policy that defends Ghana's interests without succumbing to ideological warfare. Defending media freedom, a fragile but critical pillar. Media freedom, long considered a strength of Ghanaian democracy, has shown signs of strain. The 2023 Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index placed Ghana at 62nd globally, a notable drop from previous years. Journalists have reported instances of intimidation and physical threats, politically motivated lawsuits, limited access to government data and public records. This trend, if unchecked, risks eroding one of Ghana's most essential democratic guardrails. To reclaim its leadership in press freedom, Ghana must fully implement the Right to Information (RTI) Act, ensure independent and well-funded media regulators, protect investigative journalists through legal and security frameworks, encourage media houses to invest in fact-checking and ethics training, Pan-African identity and global influence, how Ghana is shaping the cultural future of Africa. Ghana's contributions to Africa's political identity extend well beyond statecraft and economics. They reach deeply into culture, memory, and global symbolism. In a world increasingly defined by soft power, cultural exports, and heritage diplomacy, Ghana is fast becoming the spiritual and cultural home for the global African family. The Year of Return, 2019, and its successor initiative Beyond the Return, 2020-2030, represent a bold vision of reconnection between Africa and its diaspora. These programs brought over 1 million visitors to Ghana, generated $3.3 billion in tourism revenue, and reignited global discussions on Pan-Africanism, identity, and reparative justice. By investing in cultural institutions like the Decan Center, expanding creative industries, and celebrating Afrocentric art, music, and fashion, Ghana is positioning itself as a Pan-African cultural epicenter, a heritage pilgrimage site for the African diaspora, a hub for cultural diplomacy and educational tourism. In doing so, Ghana is rewriting the African story, from victimhood to resilience, from exploitation to innovation, from fragmentation to global influence. Advice to African leaders, charting the path forward. Ghana's evolving story provides not just inspiration, but a blueprint for African leaders who seek to build resilient, just, and prosperous nations. As Ghana's democratic journey demonstrates, institutions alone do not guarantee success. It takes political will, civic culture, and regional solidarity. Here is a 5-point agenda African leaders must adopt. 1. Protect and strengthen democratic institutions, uphold judicial independence, professionalize electoral bodies, and ensure term limits are respected. 2. Invest in human capital and youth empowerment. Prioritize education, vocational training, digital literacy, and entrepreneurship. The future of Africa lies in its youth. Harness them. 3. Champion inclusive growth and regional integration. Address rural inequality, expand social protections, and implement AFCFTA commitments to enhance intra-African trade and industrialization. 4. Respect media freedom and embrace transparency. Foster a press that holds power accountable and strengthens democracy. Transparency builds trust. 5. Pursue a balanced foreign policy rooted in African agency. Engage global powers on equal terms, protect national sovereignty, and work towards collective African interests, especially in security, climate action, and digital governance. Summary. Key messages from Ghana's example: democracy can work in Africa. Ghana proves that democratic systems rooted in tolerance, participation, and peaceful competition can thrive on African soil. strong institutions, and civic culture. Go hand in hand, the Electoral Commission, judiciary, civil society, and religious leaders together form the bedrock of democratic resilience. Inclusive economic development is the best security policy. Reducing inequality, especially in marginalized regions, strengthens national cohesion and counters extremism. Partnerships must evolve from aid to equity. The US Ghana relationship reflects a maturing model of trade, respect, and shared values, one that should guide Africa's global diplomacy. Culture and identity are strategic assets. Ghana's embrace of Pan-African heritage and the African diaspora is redefining Africa's place in the world through soft power. Final thought. The departing U.S. ambassador's letter was more than a diplomatic farewell. It was a call to action, a reminder that the future of African nations lies not in copying others, but in doubling down on what already works within their own contexts. Ghana's democratic experiment is far from perfect, but it remains a shining symbol of what is possible when a nation's people, leaders, and partners choose dignity over division, progress over power grabbing, and unity over fear. As Africa stands at the crossroads between fragmentation and federation, between authoritarian temptation and democratic conviction, Ghana is not just a case study, it is a compass. Let Africa follow its true north. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV. Ghana's story isn't just about one country, it's about what's possible when leadership meets people power. If you believe Africa deserves better, stronger, freer futures, then share this video, hit the like button, and join the movement. Subscribe to The Bold African Voice, BAV, because together we're amplifying Africa's truth, one bold story at a time.